Oh, EA, you just can't help yourself, can you? Always spinning that yarn of bullshit. In one of my previous videos, I talked about how EA CFO Blake Jorgensen made the excuse that the reason they didn't make Star Wars Battlefront 2's microtransactions and loot boxes cosmetic only was because adding a bunch of cosmetics might violate the canon. Aside from the argument making no sense when Battlefront 2's very concept of pitting Star Wars characters from multiple eras against each other is the embodiment of violating canon, data miners later found that the game had a hidden customization menu that EA was saving for a less rainy day, suggesting that they had plans for cosmetics all along, proving that Jorgensen's excuse was complete and utter bullshit. Not to mention that Star Wars canon has already been violated through hell and back in video games throughout the years with titles like Kinect Star Wars, although granted, this particular game was published by LucasArts and Microsoft before Disney acquired the rights to Star Wars and before EA acquired exclusive license to Star Wars games. But still, the point remains that the word canon has really never meant much in video game iterations of Star Wars. So bottom line is that Jorgensen's argument was swiftly rendered moot shortly after it was made. But it doesn't stop there. During the same event, Jorgensen made the excuse that cosmetics might violate canon. He also talked a bit about Visceral shutdown and the Star Wars game that they were working on. You may recall that in EA's official press release on the matter, they talked about how while Visceral was developing a story-based, linear adventure Star Wars game, after tracking fundamental shifts in the marketplace, it became clear that to deliver an experience that players will want to come back to and enjoy for a long time to come, they needed to pivot the design and therefore decided to shift the game to be a broader experience that allows for more variety and player agency. It wasn't hard to read between the lines. What EA seemed to be implying was that this Star Wars game was shaping to be just a single-player game rather than a multiplayer service, and when they realized that they couldn't monetize it over a long period of time with microtransactions and loot boxes, they decided to take over the project and shape it into their own image. Now, a while back, when EA CEO Andrew Wilson was asked about Visceral shutdown during the EA earnings call that took place at the end of October 2017, he said the following: "You may have heard the conversation around single-player versus multiplayer or single-player versus live service. The decision to close Visceral and shift the focus of their Star Wars game wasn't about that conversation. It wasn't about this was just a single-player game and it needed to be a live service. It was more about how do we get to a point where the overall gameplay experience was right for the players. We still believe strongly in the Star Wars IP." So Andrew Wilson claimed that Visceral being shut down and their Star Wars game pivoting design had nothing to do with EA favoring a live service business model for long-term monetization over a single-player experience. Instead, he claimed that it was all about finding a gameplay experience that was right for the players. How thoughtful. With that in mind, let's now go back to what EA's CFO Blake Jorgensen had to say about the matter, who made quite a different statement from what Wilson told us a month prior. Jorgensen said, quote, "As we kept reviewing the game, it continued to look like a much more linear game, which people don't like as much today as they did 5 years ago or 10 years ago." GameSpot's article then added, EA ultimately decided to close Visceral and significantly shift the nature of the Star Wars game because it was an economic decision at the end of the day. Jorgensen thought about how many copies the game would have to sell, and he determined that EA probably wouldn't be able to reach that unspecified mark. You gotta cut the bridge when you realize you can't make a lot of money on something, Jorgensen said, adding that he is a big believer in sunk costs. So there you have it, folks. Contrary to what CEO Andrew Wilson told us, who has an extensive history of spouting PR bullshit, turns out that the linear single-player nature of Visceral Star Wars game and its inability to monetize players over a long period of time did in fact play a significant part in EA's decision to scrap the original concept of a single-player adventure game in favor of something more in line with their Games as Services initiative. The CFO's excuse: apparently gamers just don't like linear games as much today as we did 5 or 10 years ago. And by linear games, he's probably referring to non-live service single-player focused experiences in general. Yeah, okay, I'm sure that's why games like Uncharted 4 managed to sell over 8.7 million copies, why Zelda Breath of the Wild managed to push almost 5 million units and counting, why Mario Odyssey became the fastest-selling Mario game ever in the US and has already sold over 2 million copies, why Horizon Zero Dawn sold over 3 million copies, why Persona 5 and Nier Automata pushed over 2 million, why Divinity Original Sin 2 sold over 1 million, and why smaller games like Cuphead already sold over 1 million copies, and indie titles like Undertale and Stardew Valley sold over 3 million copies on PC alone. Not to mention that unlike recent EA games, the ones that I've just listed have received accolades from both critics and gamers alike, with titles like Zelda, Mario, Persona, and Horizon all being nominated for 2017 Game of the Year. So no, EA, there is no evidence indicating or suggesting that gamers don't like linear games as much as they used to. Believe it or not, gamers still quite like the idea of games having a clearly defined beginning, middle, and end, rather than being artificially drawn out and stretched thin for the sake of monetization. Now, are the aforementioned linear games raking in billions of dollars like EA is with their microtransactions and loot box infested services? No. But guess what? Those single-player games are still considered a success by their respective developers because they achieved the right balance of earning a lot of money and creating a great game. There are still developers and publishers out there who actually give a damn about the art of making games and the integrity behind that. And even if they aren't making EA level of money, they can hold their head high and proud knowing that they still made a great product that made them a good amount of profit. Jorgensen insists that gamers no longer enjoy single-player or linear games like we used to, but the reality is that it's EA that doesn't enjoy these types of games like they used to, for the simple fact that they can't make unlimited sums of money off of them. It's really that simple. As Jorgensen said himself, shutting down Visceral and reworking their Star Wars game was, above all else, an economic decision, and they have to cut the bridge when they realize they can't make a lot of money on something. The fact of the matter is that EA is the kind of company that's so focused on money that they are unwilling to make financial sacrifices just for the sake of the craft. To them, it's all about exploiting the craft to maximize profit. They have lost sight of the idea of just making a good, fair game with no strings attached, because that would only make them hundreds of millions, not billions. To EA, there is no such thing as making enough money. It's about making all the money in the world just for the sake of making money, and then reinvesting that money into more money-making schemes. It's such a pitiful and sad existence. But hey, EA can live in whatever delusion helps them sleep at night. If they want to falsely claim that linear games are dying out, they can go right ahead, while they continue facing well-deserved backlash as their reputation continues being dragged through the mud, as government officials begin cracking down on their Achilles heel of a business model, and as they continue to alienate the gaming community. The rest of us will be here enjoying the amazing linear single-player experiences that are out there right now. There's only so long that EA can maintain their current strategy of basing their business's entire foundation on predatory monetization schemes at the expense of consumers' goodwill. If EA continues their current course, there will come a time when the gaming giant's Achilles heel snaps from the weight of their own greed, a cataclysm that EA may have accelerated by overstepping their boundaries with Star Wars Battlefront 2. Anyway, with that, I would like to end this news update and discussion video. Thank you for tuning in. If you liked this video and enjoy my content, consider supporting me on Patreon to help this channel stay independent and self-sustained. And to be further updated on all things gaming news, reviews, and discussions, stay tuned right here on Young Yeah. I'll see you guys next time. Young out.